I just get started? You all decide. I'm going to turn off my camera to reduce the bandwidth. Okay. Everybody's quiet. All right. So today what I wanted to talk about a bit was just why should we be conducting observations? What's the importance of that in early childhood? And what we know is that when we are collecting data and writing those observations, which is our data, we are getting to know the children's strengths, needs, and abilities. So it's observation is a key and critical way to see where our children currently are at and where they may need more support. And it's also a great way to help understand the learning styles and the temperaments and the personalities of each of the children in our programs, because that can obviously vary very wildly from child to child. So just getting a sense of how they learn and their temperament can really help us plan and be intentional in the activities that we are designing for them. And another key critical component is ensuring that our teaching strategies are effective. So when we observe, then we can plan based on our observations, and then we can see if the planning that we developed based on those observations is really supporting the learning goals that we have set out for children. And also, we want to plan a very child-centered, responsive learning environment. We want it to be developmentally appropriate. We want it to be engaging. So observing where our children are at is a key piece of getting to that point. And another big one, because we always talk about family engagement, and we are very strong advocates of strong family engagement in our schools. So observing children is a wonderful way to be able to communicate with families about how their children are doing, how are they developing, what are they learning. And it's also a great way to develop learning goals with the children that are shared. What are the family's learning goals for their children? So getting parents involved in that. And one great factor of TSG that some programs do take advantage of is the fact that you can have parents, you can create accounts for them, and they can also input observations. Because as we all know, sometimes what we see at home with children can be very different from what we see at school. So having that input from families can really round out what we know about children. And it's just a wonderful way to get families involved in their children's learning and to help them see just how important their role is as their children's first and best teachers. So those are all the great reasons why we support this idea of conducting observations. And to any of my colleagues out there, if you feel like I've missed a critical point, please feel free to jump in or put something in the chat, because this is by no means a complete rundown on why observation is important, but these are some of the key points that we want to keep in mind. So there's a lot of decisions we need to make about observing. And, one of the keys is being prepared and planning ahead. We should, as we are watching children, as we're observing them, we're getting to know them, that allows us to start to plan and think about, what should I be observing, right? What am I looking for? What do I want to know about this child? And are there specific area of development that I'm focusing on, and why am I focusing on that? Is it that I see a need? Is it that the family has expressed concerns about a specific area of development? There's a lot of different reasons to, think about what is it that I want to observe, and some of that obviously will also be based on what we see in the children and the questions that we have. So. And then the other question is, when should I observe? And what I mean by that is, are there, for example, certain times of day? Are there certain routines where it would be helpful to observe a child? For example, if you have a child who's struggling through a certain routine, or a child who struggles through transitions, that would be a great time to observe, to kind of problem solve and figure out, okay, what supports does this child need to successfully navigate this particular routine or this transition. And also just figuring out more about, the child's strengths and the child's needs. But really figuring out what what are the times of day? You may have a child who, say, comes in the morning and is really struggling, but then maybe later in the day, they've settled in, they're more social. So maybe looking at what's different in the morning than the afternoon. So there's a lot of very compelling reasons about, when we should observe. Um, and then the question is also, how should I observe? Because we can do very formal written observations. We can set aside our time and just sort of be, sitting out of, basically take ourselves out of the classroom as the teacher and just, have our, either have our parapro leading the classroom, or perhaps they're the ones pulling out to observe and you're leading. But, are there times when it's a more effective a way to observe, to pull back and be able to, not have to be involved and just be documenting what you're seeing? And in a very busy preschool classroom, a lot of the observations are going to be what I would consider more informal, where we're in the mix and we're sitting down with the kids. It's a more active type of observation. But there's definitely compelling arguments for doing both of those things. So when we are doing that more formal observation, where we're pulled out of the supervision equation, we can have more of our attention sometimes really focused on what's happening, because we're not worrying about putting out fires everywhere as we are observing. So we may capture more data that way. And then again, why should I observe? What do I need to know? It kind of goes along with that. What should be observing? What do I want to know about the child, but also what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? And also, like, again, why is observing this child in this particular arena important right now? Has a concern been raised? Am I noticing a specific area of development where the child's struggling? So, and that might seem redundant with, what should I observe? But really thinking about the why, I think, is important, because I think it can help us hone in on, what do we need to know about this child right now? What is the most important thing? Why do I need to prioritize, looking at their social skills over, say, their, motor development? Or why do I need to prioritize observing their language over, their cognitive skills? So we should always be thinking of these questions. What should I be observing? Why am I observing? These are the things that I think it helps us focus in more as we're conducting these observations, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to sit down and just start taking notes on kids because I've got to fill up my TSG. We really want everyone to, and we know TSG is a lot of work. We really do. And we certainly want programs to provide teachers with time out of the classroom to put their documentation into TSG and to really be able to sit down and organize that documentation, and not during nap time, right? It needs to be a time when they really don't have to also be supervising children, because supervision of children, safety is the number one priority. So we want to have them time away from that, where they're not having to be concerned about that, where they can just focus on the task of observation and know that someone is watching their kids and keeping them safe while they're doing that. So, and there's a lot of different types of observation. It's, how do we capture this data? What kinds of observation should we be conducting? Because it's important to have a variety of observation types, because different forms of observation can capture different things. So, and here's this list. So, like, work samples, examples of children's writing, examples of their drawings or their artwork, having those. And it's great to have the actual work samples in a portfolio, especially it's wonderful to do that from the beginning of the year to the end, and then be able to, send that home with families. I also encourage taking photos of the actual, whether it's a writing sample, whether it's artwork, because that way you can upload it into TSG. And if something should happen to the portfolio, if it somehow gets wet or something, then at least you have that record of that work that the child did. And photos are obviously a really great way to capture a lot of different things. We can't preserve, a block tower. We can't preserve three-dimensional, art projects with found objects. So taking photos of those are a really great way to capture that kind of work that children are doing. Videos are another really great thing, and I love that you can upload videos into TSG so easily, because we can really capture things like language. We can get it right, right from the source. We can hear how the child is pronouncing words, hear, the kinds of verbs and tenses and whatnot that they're using. If they're dropping certain sounds or things like that. Also for capturing interactions between children. So video is a wonderful way to get an objective view of their social interactions with other children. Also their motor skills, taking videos, especially if you're doing, say an obstacle course, or they're out in the playground, or doing close-up video of them as they're, painting. How are they holding the brush? How are they moving their hands and their wrists? And, how are those fingers grasping the brush? The videos are a great way to capture a really rich level of detail for a lot of those things. One of the things I have noticed in my time here is that sometimes because we do go into TSG and look at we just randomly will pull a child's portfolio just to kind of do a spot check and see how things are going with documentation. And what sometimes I've seen is photos and or videos will be uploaded, and there's no explanation of what's the context of that photo or that video. So it's really, really, really important to remind folks to always talk about the context, put something written in there to say, this is a photo of, Joshua, he's making this painting, and I wanted to get a photo of how he holds his paintbrush or whatever. Because what may be obvious to a teacher as they're taking a photo and uploading it may not necessarily be obvious to us. And if you don't write down specifically what you were trying to capture in the photo, when you're doing your checkpoints later, you might forget, what was the point of this photo? So it's really important to always provide some context. And then, of course, when you want to maybe share that later with a family about, how their child's doing, that way, then you have your own notes to say, okay, so this is what I was looking at in this video, and this is why I was capturing it. So it's just important to remember that photos and videos can tell really great stories, but not necessarily in isolation, right? We've always got to have that context. So language samples are a huge component of observation, and these can be written down or recorded. And I actually like to do both, because if you're trying to capture a lot of detail and when a child is talking, sometimes we can miss little details and nuance if we're writing it down, because with a language sample, we want to document it word for word. And we want to say it exactly how they said it. We don't want to clean up their grammar. So if a child says, I run across the playground, we don't want to put in the documentation, the child said, I ran across the playground. We want to say that, he said, I run. And that's important, because that's a key that child is actually learning the grammatical complexities of English, and that they're learning about that there are different tenses to verbs. So we always want to make sure that when we're writing down language samples, that we are really grabbing it as explicitly as we possibly can. And it's really easy to miss even little details, especially if you're trying to document a talker. So also having, doing an audio recording or a video recording to capture that then you can later maybe go and transcribe is always a really great way to do it. And then the primary thing that I want to talk about today was the anecdotal observations. These have to be clear, they have to be specific, and they have to be objective. We have to really look at what the child is doing, not what we think the child is doing, not our feelings about what the child is doing. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more here. Um, it, there's basically what we're talking about is we're talking about objective versus subjective observations. And essentially, objective, the definition of objective means making an unbiased, balanced observation based on facts that we can verify, that we can actually see. So objective observations for assessment really is about really just kind of capturing everything you see and you hear, and but that information is what we use before arriving at any decisions. So it's just what we're seeing, what we're hearing. It's not what we're thinking or what what might be going on. So that really, it's what you see and hear, not what you think or feel is happening. On the other hand, subjective is kind of the opposite of that. Subjective means that we're making assumptions. We are interpreting what we see, which can be very inaccurate. And what can happen is making interpretations based on our opinions without any verifiable facts is not objective. That's subjective. So we always want to make sure that we are really just documenting what we see, what we hear the child doing. And one of the things about that, well, I'll get to talking about recognizing our biases in a moment. But there are a lot of subjective, whoops, hang on, I think I missed something. Yes, I did. I'm so sorry. I didn't actually talk about these words for a moment. So when we're talking about observation, objective means things like specific descriptions of facial expressions, descriptions of physical gestures, how was the child holding, the pencil with a 3-finger pincer grasp? Were they holding it in their fist? We really want to get that specific in our detail. And that's what we see. Of course, using quotations and descriptions of things that are built or made, just describing, how many blocks the child used to build, to stack a bunch of blocks or something. Those are very specific, objective facts. What we want to avoid is those opinions, those judgments, those labels, and the opinions, and those I think it's tricky. Those can kind of sneak in sometimes. So we have to be really careful what we think may be happening, and our judgments about a child, labels, and I'm going to go over a list of words that are kind of a little red flag that we're sort of using the assumptions and the labels a little bit here. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about things like saying just because, or actually there's one that's not even on the list that is one of my button pushers, which is for no reason. He walked across the classroom and hit her for no reason. That is not an objective observational statement. That is an opinion. We don't know the reason. And he may not know the reason, but something happened preceding that incident of him hitting. So, but we need to keep those words out of it. Always, she is always angry when she comes to school in the morning. He never shares his toys. These words here, all these words on this list are very much subjective, their opinions. And yes, words like happy, angry, sad, You know, I chose these photos because they're very, you know, they kind of stand out to me. The top photo, a lot could be assumed from this photo if we don't know what's happening, right? Did the child standing over the little guy on the floor, you know, you see how one foot is kind of more in front of the other? Did he just kick him? Is he about to kick him? Did he just walk up and that just happens to be how he's standing and he's going to give him help? We have no idea from this photo. We can't tell what happened. We don't know why the little guy in the yellow shirt is on the floor crying. Is he sad? Is he angry? You know, did he fall down and get hurt? Is he tantruming? We don't know. So any of those kinds of subjective words to describe this photo wouldn't be appropriate. So, and we want to look at this in terms of if somebody else looks at this, we want to describe exactly and only what we see, and not what we think is happening or not what we think someone else is going to think is happening. So, and while it's tempting to use words like, oh, she, smart, helpful, pretty, those are also subjective words and they don't have any place in observations. Because again, those are assumptions, those are labels, even, and whether a label is negative or positive, it does not have a place in observation. It needs to be what we see, what is verifiable, what is right in front of us. Mercy, do you have any questions so far? I know I've been kind of running through this. I wanted to see if you or anybody had any questions or comments so far.
Well, not really. It's good information. I have other questions for something else, but maybe that will be a different.
Yes, at the end we will have questions. Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, here, let me get my mouse to work. Okay, so important to bring up, and I actually included a whole long quote here, because I do think we are each the sum of our experiences, and so just by nature of being human, we all can come into any particular situation with some kind of bias or just a specific lens that we see through. So as it says here, so as not to lose our objectivity, it's important to keep an open heart, an open mind, and a clear lens. So and this is really key for classroom teachers, and as a classroom teacher for several years myself, I understand this. It can be easy to let a child's behavior trigger us, right? Especially like if you have a certain thing that pushes your buttons. For me as a teacher, my thing was kids who spit. I couldn't stand spitters. It drove me nuts. I hated spitting. I could handle being hit and punched, but I could not handle the spitters. I don't know why. It was just something, but we have to think about things that trigger us. Or are we triggered by children who are super messy? Are we triggered by children who are, for lack of a better word, who whine a lot, who always, oh, I can't do it, is that the kind of thing? So we really need to look at that. We really need to look at what are our potential triggers? What are the things that can get in our way when we need to be objective in looking at children? So we really must focus on collecting, as it says here, objective observation, evidence, and use that data to reflect on what might be causing a behavior. If there's a certain behavior that we find, upsetting or difficult, so or just what we perceive as a quote unquote negative behavior, we really, rather than letting that behavior provoke us, what's causing it? Why is this child using this behavior? Because if a child's using a behavior, on some level it works for them, right? It's what they know. It may be that they don't have any other skills in their little, social emotional toolbox. So we need to look at the behavior, and instead of going, wow, that's really annoying, we need to say, okay, what can we do to support this child to find another way to solve, this particular problem? I hope that's making sense. And as intentional teachers, one of our primary roles is to empower children and to build meaningful relationships by creating warm, caring environments. This is so important. Um, and as it says here, in order to get to that point, we really have to think about how are we going to help that scaffold that, the child's behaviors to get them to the point where they're using more effective, more functional behaviors and skills rather than things that aren't working for them. I mean, it may work for them in that, they may, if they don't want to deal with something, they may fall on the floor and start crying. So in the moment it might be functional, but obviously long term that's not a functional behavior to use. So how do we help them get to the point where they can cope with, for example, frustration, so that they don't, end up falling down and crying every time something doesn't go the way that they expected it to go. How do we support them through that process of developing those skills? And one of the things that I think is important is we have to challenge ourselves to really do that with the children who maybe are the ones that push our buttons the most, right? And because it could be, we're going to have days as teachers where, the child that is the hardest to deal with sometimes, like that's the child that's always at school and never absent. And so rather than going, oh, got to deal with this again, really that's the child that needs that really needs our support and needs a positive, nurturing relationship. So we really need to break through our own judgments, our own biases, the things that push our buttons, in order to provide as much support for these kids as we possibly can. Is this making sense so far, everybody? I hope. Now, being mindful of time, I wanted to just try a few, so feel free to chime in the chat or open up a mic. So just a quick exercise on, is this an objective or a subjective observation? So I'll read the first one. Alyssa walked up to Jalea and screamed because she wanted the doll that Jalea was holding.
Can be subjective.
Yes, exactly. That one's subjective. Because she wanted are the key terms. We have, we really don't know her intention. And so really being able to just write down what she did, instead of deciding it was because she wanted the doll. We just don't know that exactly. So Ryan was riding a tricycle. He rode too close to Martine and rudely yelled, "Move!" when he rode by. Martine became sad and started to cry. Objective or subjective?
I think first part is objective. Martin became sad and started to cry. Maybe it is objective.
That one actually, I would say, is somewhat subjective, because I threw in the word rudely yelled.
Yeah.
See, I'm trying to be a little tricky here. He yelled. It's fine to say he yelled, "Move." It's when we put in the word rudely that it's like, because again, and that kind of can go back to some of our triggers, because some of us can tolerate a lot more yelling and than others, and what is considered rude by one person might just be they're just a little loud by somebody else. So yeah, and we also want to consider, do we know Martine became sad? I mean, he definitely started to cry. Was he sad? Was he actually, angry because he got, this, Ryan yelled in his face? So we would also want to avoid that word sad and just say, Martine started to cry, and just take that word sad right out of there. And what we could do is describe his face, describe, the tears and whatnot, but that word sad shoves it over into the subjective category. So, and this next one, Megan sat on the floor in the book corner looking at the very hungry caterpillar. Kara walked up to her and asked, "What are you reading?" Megan looked up at Kara and did not say anything. She continued to look at her book. Kara then chose another book from the shelf and sat next to Megan. Does that feel objective or subjective?
This is objective, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't put in any opinion about, Megan, Megan didn't say anything, but that's just what happened. There wasn't a judgment about, she wasn't rude, she wasn't, being shy. That's another one. If I had said, Megan was too shy to say anything, that would have made it subjective because we just don't know. We have no idea why Megan didn't respond, and it's, not necessarily a positive or negative reason why she didn't respond. So yeah, so exactly. Um, and and I don't know how many more of these we want to go through. I came up with a few more, but uh, I do want to mention this one because I tried to add some detail. Angelica stood at the easel. She held the paintbrush in her left hand, dipping it into the orange paint and moving it up and down several times. Then she dipped her paintbrush in the blue paint and made 3 circles with the paint over the orange lines. Angelica looked at the painting, then looked at me, smiled, and said, "I painting."
Objective.
Yeah. And yes, thank you, Mercy. And that level of detail is really important. Like, which hand is she holding the brush with? Which way did she paint? Because there is that developmental trajectory of, making the up and down strokes, the side to side strokes, circles. So that kind of detail can be really key in documenting where a child is at in their progression of writing and drawing. So this is the kind of details that we really hope to see and that we encourage. So and then the next one is this might be a little tricky. I don't know. Derek entered the classroom at drop-off time. His eyebrows were scrunched together and his arms were folded across his chest. When Adam said, "Hi, Derek," Derek said no and went to the block area. Derek sat on the floor with his arms folded across his chest.
I think another objective.
Thank you. Yeah, what do you think is objective about that one, Mercy?
Well, just describe like how he kind of looked, the face and everything that he did. Not necessarily any opinion was added there.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the words angry, or in a bad mood, none of that was in there. Yeah, it's just but that facial expression of those brows scrunched together and things like that, those are the kinds of details we want to see. And then I think the last one's pretty easy, but Belinda is always happy and smiling. She loves to play with baby dolls.
That's obviously subjective.
Yeah, it's a very obviously. Thank you. Yes. So I'd throw that one in at the end. But yes, yeah, so and it sounds lovely, that Belinda sounds like a lovely little child. She's happy, she's smiling, she loves to play with baby dolls. That's wonderful, but that's not an objective observation. And again, that's an opinion. She may be smiling, but is she happy? We don't know. So yes, so these are just some examples for folks to utilize to get a sense of what is helpful in really capturing details about children. So I'm wondering if we should have the slides available. I don't know. I included also, I want to be mindful and have some time for questions. So here are just some good resources. The Mercy, I don't know if you're familiar with the Head Start, the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center that we call ECLEC.
Trust me, I don't. I'm new to all this, so I don't know anything.
Great. Okay. Well, then hopefully this is a helpful resource. So ECLEC, because the other title is a mouthful. ECLEC is the Office of Head Starts, the National Office of Head Starts. Essentially, it's their knowledge clearinghouse. It is a massive website. You can spend days and weeks in there. But they did have a section on child screening and assessment. And it's a really I would encourage you will find so much on so many different areas of early childhood on this website. It's an amazing resource. But I wanted to make sure. Oh, thank you. And Brooke just put the link in the chat. So you can search for pretty much any topic related to early childhood on that website, and you're going to find some really great information. It's all research based. It's a wonderful resource. Also, the Child Care Technical Assistance Network, that another great overall resource, and they have a wonderful section on observation, documentation, and reflection. So another really good one to have in your toolbox. Lots and lots of great information there. And to get specific about observation assessment in early childhood, this is a PDF that I found that I loved, and it was done by College of the Canyons, and it was a manual that they came up with for their college classes on observation assessment. Really, some really good stuff in there. So, and there are a ton of other resources on observation and assessment, but I think these are really good places to start. So, and it looks like, let me see if I can get the link. Let's see, what do we have? We have the two ECLECs in there, and then I'll try to get the other copy link, and let's see if I can paste. So here is the child care. Oh no, what is that one? Oh, okay. So the link I just posted, Mercy, was for that PDF, I believe. Yep. And then let me see if I can copy for the Child Care Technical Assistance Network. I'm going to paste that one in here. There we go. So if you want to grab those links out of the chat, please feel free. We have 10 minutes left. I feel like I really blazed through this, but I wanted to make sure and leave some time at the end for questions. So what questions do you have for us, Mercy? And am I pronouncing your name correctly? Because I should have asked you that right up front. I apologize. Did we lose Mercy? I think we did. Okay. No, Mercy's still there. I see you. Okay. You are muted, so I don't know if you're
Okay.
no,
I just lost and now I'm back. I
okay.
opened the link, so it opened another tab.
Okay.
I'm very new to all these. I've been in the school district for it's my 11th year, and this year um, I've decided, or I should say, I have accepted the new task of leading the early childhood um, team. And the thing is, first things first, our preschool is under first things first. So they have their own directors. I don't worry about them. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
What I what's under my, how should I say this? Under my team will be kindergarten to third grade for the early child. Is that part